All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Cornhole Geartalk podcast presented by West Georgia Cornhole and Titan Bags. I'm your host, Ben, and I'm with my co-host, Kendall.
What's going on, everyone?
And Josh.
Howdy, howdy.
So we got some fun topics to talk about today, but before we do, just notice on the top of your screen, if you are watching, you can use... I
know, trying to...
yeah, up... Oh. Yeah, it's always so hard to point to it.
No, I'll get better.
You can use the code Geartalk, one word, no space, for 5% off your order at westgeorgiacornhole.com or titancornholebags.com. Either one of them. So get you a little discount on your next order.
Yeah.
And show us some love because, you know, the more that you use that coupon code, the more we get supported on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, we're allowed to keep doing these.
Yeah. All right, so what are we talking about today, Josh?
We're talking about stats and scoring just kind of as a whole. And so I guess when saying as a whole, it kind of opens up the first part of it.
You're talking about the cornhole?
Yeah. The hole in the cornhole. Yeah, that's what we're talking. Yeah, stats and then specifically the hole in the cornhole board. Those are our two.
It's 3 points.
Yeah,
end of podcast.
Yep,
there we go.
But yeah, just kind of like stats, where stats have taken us in cornhole, what stats people care about, what people are observing, kind of how we're obtaining those stats, and then not just that, but kind of where it all started when it comes to scoring, obtaining stats, and all that kind of stuff, where it just originated from, like before the apps, before the digitowers, and all that kind of stuff. And so it kind of opens it up to the beginning point of just what was scoring like whenever you guys were first playing cornhole, whenever you first were throwing bags in somebody's backyard, like. Were you just keeping track in your head? Is that all it was? Have you always had some weird piece of plywood with some numbers painted on it? I don't know, because I'm only like 3 or 4 years into cornhole now, so I skipped past the scary phase. I started off with a score tower.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, can I tell the story of the scoremate then?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So obviously we're a cornhole manufacturing place, and this is back in the early days. I mean, this was before there were big leagues and anything like that. And we would go out on Fridays. I mean, there were like 4 of us back at that time. Well, we would go out on Fridays after work and we'd play cornhole. And we would be out there and arguing about the score. So we found this thing that some dude in like Oklahoma made.
Yeah.
And it was like a PVC pipe, basically, just a bunch of pieces of PVC put together. And it came up and it had this like T arm at the top. And it had these like key rings on it with flip cards. So you had 2 sets of flip cards.
Yep.
And you had, you know, the 0 through 9 on one side and 0 through 9 on the other. And so you could flip it to whatever score you just got. And I remember sitting out there thinking, like, I really wished I had a place to put my drink on this. And so I bought these like boat cup holder inserts, like little plastic things, and I drilled holes in them and zip tied it to the PVC.
Yep.
And man, I made a beautiful, terrible thing.
Oh, yeah.
And by the end of it, we're just sitting there looking at it like we're a bunch of idiots. Like, we make cornhole stuff.
Yeah.
Let's make something that works. And so we made what we initially called the scoremate. And it was definitely a lot different than what it is today, but it was this tower thing that had a detachable leg so you could take it apart, and it had cup holders on the top of it, and it had holes drilled into it where you could put golf tees to keep score.
Yeah, for the score. Yeah,
and we had this big sticker that we put on it. That's what the graphics were, and it had the numbers and everything, so we'd have to line that sticker up just right, whatever. I mean, this was back before the days of anybody UV printing on cornhole boards, so it was all decal work. And so that was the birth of the scoremate. And then, you know, we started selling those things like crazy. And, you know, not too far down the road, I mean, it became a staple in cornhole. Like all the leagues and stuff, they're like, dude, we've been waiting for something like this.
That's what I was going to say, is I feel like it's a lot of the leagues and like the just kind of pop-up tournaments that happen in a lot of places now where stuff like the scoremate is perfect, because you're able to disassemble it. You're able to have 30 of them and not have, you know, this terracotta army of score towers that are, you know, you can't disassemble. Because I see stuff on Addicted to Cornhole all the time that look exactly like what you were describing with the PVC and just kind of chaos.
Yeah.
But one, as much as I like seeing those, a lot of it is because they stay where they're at.
Right,
Like the ones that look a little ridiculous are normally like that's somebody's backyard and they're just going to leave them there forever. So it's like, do what you want. But especially when you have 20 of them you're trying to set up, I feel like that's definitely where the score mate was needed.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's like if you're going to have any sort of portability or storage capability, like, I mean, if this is something that you've got in your backyard and you're going to store it in your garage, like go for the score mate because you can break it down.
Yeah,
and
it's
like stores flat.
You can literally, mine is behind my door and I forget I have it half the time. I'll go set the boards up and I'll be like, just playing and we'll start arguing about the score. And I'm like, what am I doing? And I go unpack the score mate and there it is, good to go. But
that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, I forgot that my parents.
That's a good sales pitch.
Yeah. I was gonna say because I forgot that my parents had one, and I had set up the boards like on my lunch break, and then I'm working from home. And she was like, "Oh, do you want this?" I'm like, "You have one?" She's like, "Yeah." And it was like under the futon. And it was just like on the ground underneath, and I was just like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, that was one of the big things for us. So when I started playing, it was like backyard stuff. Boards were terrible. The bags were 3 were filled with chalk and 1 was filled with gravel because we busted it. Like it was very rudimentary. Like we didn't know what we were doing, and every game would end one of 2 ways. Somebody would get mad because they busted and quit, or somebody would get mad about the score and they would quit.
Yep.
Every single time. So I think the score mate was definitely like the next step for us. We just never got there.
We got to talk about bust.
I was about to say, if you're just going to shimmy it in there, I feel like we got to talk. Because also similarly with the score tower, of how I got to skip all the awful score towers, I also, for the most part, never played with people who played by that rule.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's always like when people ask, I'm like, no, like who does that? But I know that there's this whole community of people that do, and especially used to, before it kind of took off. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's just something I've never played a single game of Cornhole where the bust rule is in effect.
Dude, and not only is there a bust rule, but there are different bust rules.
What?
Like, yeah, people play with different ways to operate. So, like,
I guess fully explain the bust rule to me. Though.
Okay, so for
the
example,
generic one, I don't know.
I was at a brewery,
Okay.
not super far away from here. They happened to have some of our boards, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go hang out and throw over there.
Yeah.
I met a random couple of guys, and they're like, "You want to play a game?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And so my son and we played against these guys, and they asked, like, "Do you want to go to bust, or do you want to play bust?" I said, "Okay, sure. What are your bust rules?" And it was complicated.
Oh no.
So here's what they said. I'll kind of try to explain it the best that I can. So if someone is at, let's say, 19, right? If they go over 21, they bust and they drop back down to 15.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that.
However, the other person, if they get above the score of the person who busted, they collect those points, but the person who went over still busted. So they drop back down to 15. So if you bust, the name of the game from that point forward is to just get as many points as you can to prevent the other person from scoring.
Interesting.
That was the wildest version of bust that I had heard. Yeah.
So wait, so they collect the points that were dissolved essentially?
They can still collect points.
Yeah.
As long as they're not going to bust.
Okay.
And then if you both bust, you just both drop back down to 15.
That's okay.
Oh, wow.
It's
all right.
That's too much for me.
Yeah, it was like, as soon as you go over. So, for example, I had a board that was on the back of the board, and the guy slid it up and knocked my bag off.
That's what I was just about to say, yeah.
And so it forced me to have to shoot.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, well, he had a bag sitting on the back.
I'm
like, if I accidentally do an and one here, then I bust.
And
so there were all kinds of weird rules, and it made the game go on for a long time because of it.
I do get, like, if it was just like, the two of us playing, I could see that being like a one-off, haha, let's play this fun bust rule to change it up. Like, I totally get that. But that just being all the time, I feel like it eventually just becomes like a punishment for being good at the game. I do know there's got to be obviously a skill set around not busting.
I mean, it makes you be more precise.
Yeah, for sure.
What I hate is I've played it a couple times. What I always hated is you're sitting there and you're sitting on 19, you throw one in the hole, and then they just throw their first bag off. And then you're like, okay, you throw your bag off. Then they just throw all their bags off the board, and then you just automatically bust.
Yeah, I would go home.
That's why I cannot stand it, dude.
Sun could still be up. I'm driving home.
Yeah, I've ran into some crazy scoring rules, honestly. There was I went to this one place one time, and this is after I'd been playing for a while. This is like end of last year. And I went with my buddy, and not him nor his friends were very big into cornhole. And we get there, and they had the board set up. They were throwing. They actually had some decent bags. And they're like, all right, let's get a tournament together. Everybody put in $10. I was like, cool. And we did singles. And my first frame, I threw a 4-bagger. And this guy just slams the bags on the boards and walks off mad. And I was like, what is going on? He's like, 4-bagger, you win.
Oh, yes. I've heard
was like,
the
what?
Cornholio or whatever. Yeah.
I won every single game in less than 3 frames that night and made like $110. And people were not happy.
Yeah, I've heard if you get a 4-bagger, and then I think it's like if nobody else gets one in the hole or something, it's Cornholio and you win the whole game.
Yeah.
I have never heard that one.
Yeah, I've heard that one before.
Yeah. It was insane.
It's always weird because like whenever you're talking with somebody, they want to play a game, and then they start asking about that kind of stuff, like bust or are we playing this or that, and you're immediately, or at least my brain goes to, okay, you're not like deep in the cornhole culture.
Yeah. That's
Like,
definitely the first, like, I don't want to say red flag as if it's a bad thing, but that's the first alarm that goes off, just like, oh, you don't play a lot.
Oh, you're not a cornhole
Yeah,
player.
exactly.
You're not a real cornhole.
You don't work at a cornhole shop.
Yeah, exactly.
Your whole life is not dedicated to this. Yeah. And so it's like the bust rule, I think it actually has some very appropriate places, you know.
Oh,
Yeah.
I play bust rule with my brother-in-law and my dad and stuff whenever we're hanging out. We're going to do it this weekend. It's going to happen.
It's definitely fun to change things up every
Yeah.
once in a while.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like all of us have just gotten good enough to the point where if we don't do something like that, we're just going to have very quick games.
Yeah,
You know?
or they just end up, especially when you're playing against this, like if there's 4 people playing together the whole time you're just playing doubles, all the games are going to end up the same way for the most part. So yeah, it definitely mixes it up to where it adds a whole new dynamic.
But like that's the reason why your leagues don't do that, because it would make games go on forever.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then you would never finish a tournament.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if you're playing stuff where you have to broadcast on CBS or ESPN, you better make sure that gets done quickly. And that's, I mean, I would be inclined to believe that's why they started doing the shootout framework.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you got
absolutely. Yeah.
We got to hustle this thing on, you know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's not just hustling it. I mean, it's a whole different conversation, but like it's not just speeding it up, but it also puts kind of the fire under each person, and so you get more interesting frames whenever people are like, when they only got 2 frames to make something happen.
Oh, yeah.
People make way crazier decisions than
yeah.
they would normally ever.
It makes
make.
for really good TV.
Yeah,
it really does.
for sure. So I get it in that aspect.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the
Insane
shootout
aspect.
style. Sorry,
but-
inside joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, imagine playing bust without a score mate, though. The troubles of keeping
Oh
up
my
with that in your
gosh.
head,
Yeah.
I could not.
Yeah, no. I would say that honestly brings us to kind of the next point is what Scoreholio did for the sport as a whole.
Yes.
I guess outside of Scoreholio, I know there was I think it was called the Digitower.
Yeah,
the
I
thing with
think
like the
so.
button that we
Yeah.
had at the one
Oh,
league,
yeah.
but
At the time, we had some at the tavern.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember that.
but outside of that, I believe it was Scoreholio that kind of started the whole scoring.
Tablet-based, yeah,
Tablet and
app-based.
phone, and I feel like that really kind of set the tone for not everything, but kind of the beginning of
It
tournaments. all that
definitely
stuff.
sparked a new era
yeah,
of cornhole for sure. Yeah, and it's like Scoreholio's software and having scoring be compatible with tablets and phones was so changing to the game itself that, I mean, it even changed our products.
Yeah.
Like
Oh, yeah.
we modified the ScoreMate to be able to hold tablets.
Yep, tablets, phones, yeah,
Yeah.
because it just became the new norm.
Right.
And it makes it so much easier for people to get involved as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, whenever I first got into it, it's about the time Scoreholio really started to become a staple.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I was here at the shop, and only way I knew where tournaments were was I was hearing it from all the guys who were, you know, they're in all the groups, they know everything. But now, like, even if I go out of town, I can flip straight to that app, and bam, I can see where I can play, when I can play. You can see the level of competition there, like everything right there. It makes it super easy to get involved.
Yeah, that's really nice.
I definitely love that. So that, you know, that ushered in a whole new season of what was happening with scorekeeping on for the game of cornhole. And of course, a lot of the other leagues, they picked up on it and said, "Oh, well, we got to do something too." And the ACL came out with their scoring and tournament system.
Yeah.
Because like Scoreholio, if I'm right, I think they started off with just the scoreboard, and then they moved along into, hey, well, let's run tournaments with this.
Yeah.
And so, by the time the ACL jumped in, they started doing that too. And so you've got all these different softwares out there that you're able to see the brackets, see the scores, auto assign people to the next match, all kinds of good features. I mean, it's like Cornhole, people often associate the game of Cornhole with people who don't know what's going on with the world. They're kind of just backwoods folks or whatever.
Yeah.
But dude, there's some smart people involved in this game.
100%.
Yeah, like being able to put together all these softwares, all these crazy products, and manufacturing processes with this stuff. I mean, it's a big deal.
Oh,
It
yeah.
is.
Well, and it's just become so important to keep track of all that information.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I guess one question I do have is, obviously the ACL has their app. Was there overlap time where Scoreholio was being used in the ACL?
I don't think so.
There wasn't.
There
no.
wasn't?
They've always done their own thing.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I didn't know if like at the beginnings, if there was like, because like I said, I'm pretty sure Scoreholio was the first scoreboard app, but I didn't know.
ACO uses.
Yeah. I could see that.
Scoreholio.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
Because I think it was the ACL who first introduced all of the don't quote me on this, because they were both about the same time, but the very in-depth per round scoring, instead of just clicking up to on the scoreboard, you're putting how many in, how many on, all that. And that's what allows us to get all these crazy stats we see now. And once that started happening, I think that's when you could really see the Scoreholio like soar. Like they were like, let's get this dialed in, let's figure this out, and they have done a great job with it.
Yeah. Well, it was like, at that point that the magic scoring stuff got brought into the picture. That's when you started seeing the collection of a lot of this, like the PPR off percentage, like all of that stuff started really spiking, which kind of leads to an interesting point of discussion.
Yeah.
Because we have all of these stats, but what the heck do they even mean?
Yeah, and really also, I guess, how important are they? Because my big thing is, I don't really hear people talk about win-loss ratio. I don't really, obviously it's an important stat.
Which is crazy. That's the most important stat.
I would assume that is the most important stat. I mean, obviously PPR and all that kind of stuff, it's super important. It's a something for you to gauge for yourself. And that kind of, I don't know, that leads me back to also like whatever happened to Ghost. Does anybody do that anymore? Do people still play against Ghost? I have no idea.
I feel like
I do
Ghost
it sometimes.
I feel like Ghost was real big whenever COVID was a thing.
Yeah.
That's when it was introduced, and that's like, I mean, that was the way to play. I think it's LeVar was still doing some Ghost tournaments. I think I saw him doing that earlier this year. Have to talk to him about that, because I'm interested in that, honestly.
But yeah, I guess like you do bring up a good point, is like how important from like a macro scale is the PPR stuff, because we have people who play different ways. We have people who play a muddy board, and we have people who are just purely a slide shot. And so, I guess we can bring up the Jacob Trzynski games where he's throwing over an 11 for 2 games and lost both of them. Throwing over an 11. And so it seems like that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you have games where people are throwing 6s, and it's because they're throwing just roll bags and just a muddy board. And it's like, if someone were to throw a 6 and the other person's throwing a 5, you're having the same intensity of a game that Jacob Trzynski was playing, but it just looks different on paper.
Right.
And so I feel like the conversations end up being different solely because it's just this real big number. I don't know.
It's hard to look at all of that as a whole. I think as a whole, you can kind of gauge like if you see a pro player whose PPR is like an 8.5, you're gonna know like, okay, he likes a dirty board.
Yeah.
And if you see a pro player whose PPR is like 10, 10-2, you're gonna be like, okay, that's a slide bag player. So I think once you get to that level, you can kind of use those stats to really, really gauge not exactly how good somebody is, but how well they play.
Yeah, their consistency.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then like on more casual level, like around here playing the bars, league, all of that, there's some nights where somebody new will come in and they'll have like a 6 PPR, and they'll go lights out. They'll beat everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think once you get up to a higher level, those stats really, really mean something.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe this isn't the best analogy in the world, but I'm a big Braves fan, but if you compare somebody like Greg Maddux to Spencer Strider, right? Spencer Strider has he's trending to have like a very high K percentage strikeouts, right? Well, Greg Maddux, he used to put a lot of balls in play to get ground outs, basically. Well, he was really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that he is any less of a pitcher than Spencer Strider, even though Strider gets all these ridiculous strikeouts.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Well, it's kind of the same way that I look at PPR, where it's like, well, that guy has a 6, that guy has an 11,
Mm-hmm.
but this guy with 6 has more wins. What's the deal?
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that win percentage, I think, is just so much more important. It's like, I don't care about, like, the PPR doesn't give an accurate depiction of who that player actually is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I really wish that there was a stat. I mean, maybe, Benjamin Boudhou at Scoreholio or the guys in the ACL can come up with something and think through this, but like having like an ERA stat for Cornhole, like earned points allowed, you know.
I know there's
Like,
the average point differential. I know they have that, right?
So now, one thing I've been very heavily invested into the past couple months is the SPR on Scoreholio. That is your Scoreholio player rating.
Mm-hmm.
And it is amazing. I mean, you can really, like, if let's say I'm a 5-level skill player and I'm playing a 10-level skill player, if they barely beat me, then I'm gaining points. Because in theory, they should have beat me really bad. And then the other way around, if I'm a 5 playing a 10 and I beat them, I'm gaining a whole lot more. And this number is just every single game you do score magic, it's just constantly adjusting. And I've seen that, like, just looking at our club and who's where in the club, you can really see that number working. Like, you can see, you see some people start to fall off a little bit and they just start slowly dropping. And, like, what you're seeing in person, you can see on that SPR stat. It's kind of crazy, honestly.
Does it track all that with blind draws?
It does.
Oh, see, I don't know how I feel about that, because then I feel like, if somebody's this top tier player, I feel like then it starts to nurture this. They're upset that they got a crappy partner. And so they're like, oh, now if I lose to this other team. So, like, if some person's I don't know, what is it, 10 out of 10? Or, like, is it a 10 is, like, the highest you can get on SPR?
The highest you can get is 100.
Okay, so, like, let's say you have, like, a 90. I don't know. And then he gets matched with somebody who's a 20. And then he's playing against two teams that are 260s. They're probably going to win. Just overall, the amount of points they're going to be earning on the other end, I don't think they'd be able to keep up with. And then I feel like you have this guy who's upset that he has kind of a crappier partner because his new SPR stat's going to get affected. I don't know.
It takes all that into account.
Okay.
Like, for instance, we were playing last week in league, and Haley threw amazing. She was throwing a perfect game. I got invested in her throwing a perfect game. I threw like a 6 against somebody much worse than me, and I should have, I should have beat him pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And so we won that game. I still lost SPR because of my comparison to him. I did so bad against the individual player we won. I still lost SPR.
Okay.
So it's really good at gauging that kind of stuff and keeping it pretty accurate.
Okay.
Well, it's tracking on the individual level, though.
Yeah.
It has, there's one setting in there to, like you said, make it track individually, and I think it'll weigh more individually than it will as a team.
Yeah, because I know it knows who's on either end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a really impressive stat, one that I've been, like, whenever we started doing a lot of SPR stuff with our league, and I was like, man, what is this number? How's it, like, what is going on here? And I've been watching it and really paying attention to how it's been working, and it seems pretty daggum spot on. It's very impressive.
Yeah, it's like anybody that knows me knows that I'm like a big nerd and I love stats.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one of the primary reasons why I've gotten so deep into baseball. You know, it's the StatCast era. You got stats on everything.
Mhm.
You know, how many times a guy's shoelaces comes undone. Like,
Yeah.
ridiculous stuff.
Yeah.
I'd be at 4 today.
But it's like with cornhole, it's exciting to see that's happening, because eventually at a certain point, as the sport grows, I know that some people think that it's useless and dumb, but like as the sport continues to grow and the professionalism continues to rise, a lot of these stats are going to make big differences for teams, sponsorships, all kinds of stuff. It's like, well, let me see your scorecard.
Yeah.
You know, how are you performing? Well, if you don't make above this number, well, you're not going to be on our team, or you're not going to get sponsored by us, or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
And those stats are going to play a big part in it.
Well, and I feel like you kind of answered it when you opened this up, was saying that like you're a big nerd who likes stats, and that's one of the reasons you got into baseball. I guarantee you there's going to be people who are more attracted to cornhole if they know they can get nerdy with it. If they know they can compare stats between pros, and they can, like, because I feel like we're still in the world of where most people who keep up with all this also play. They're also really into cornhole. But we have plenty of people who watch football who've never played. They're just hobbyists, and that they love the sport. Yeah. And I feel like we're kind of on the crest of getting people who love to watch cornhole who probably have no interest in playing. And when those people really get into it, they're going to want those stats. They want those numbers to, feed into it.
I mean, there's also stuff that, you got to think about with stuff like DraftKings too.
Yeah.
Like the stats and all that make a difference there as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Yeah.
One of the most enjoyable projects I've had here was whenever you had me go through and get all the stats for our pros for Bag and Bash.
Mm-hmm.
Just going through and being able to look at everybody's and really dive into that and seeing that side of it, it was honestly really enjoyable. And I found myself now that, like, after every open or every national, everything, I'm going through, I'm looking at like almost every individual player, seeing what they were doing, how they improved, like seeing 2 games this weekend where both opponents threw above an 11, and yeah, that's insane to me. But just keeping up with all that, it's easy to invest a lot of time into.
Yeah,
it's very enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm just wondering when a company like Topps is going to start coming out with cornhole player cards.
Well, I know specifically Topps, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure like you can reach out to them and get them to make cards, right? I'm pretty sure you can, like, I don't know, there's some way, because I know, I believe it's Topps. There have been a number of cards that have already been made. And I want to say Matt Guy has a card that's coming out with somebody. And so I feel like it's coming, but I think there's a difference between when it's their released packs versus if they're like, if like the ACL were to order, a bunch and then have them available.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like we're not too far away.
If we got to that point, I'd be back into the card collecting game.
Same.
I got Tony Smith's rookie card.
Who wants it?
Yeah, the interesting thing is it's like, because I feel like the sport is so young, and a lot of things are still nebulous, even though it's been going for a minute. There are a lot of like come and go players.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
There have been players who have won a world championship or won a national that haven't really done much since.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm interested to see if there are going to be people that continually sit closer to the top.
Yeah.
Because it seems like literally end of last year we had the phenomenon in Mark Richards.
Mm-hmm.
And then beginning of this year, oh my God, Justin Burton Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And now we're on the Tony Smith, Jacob Jasinski era.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like, those other players are still staying consistent, but it's weird not seeing that one dominant player, that one dominant team constantly up there like you see in other sports.
It's been weird not seeing. I mean, obviously they're still tearing up the court everywhere, but not seeing Jamie Graham and Matt Guy everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because I feel like that's, as much as Mark Richards was insane last year, you couldn't scroll through Addicted without seeing something about Jamie Graham and Matt Guy.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy how I think it's just, it's a fairly new sport. There's a lot more, I wouldn't say a lot more, but there are a lot of variables that go into each individual game, not even each individual tournament, but each individual game that do play in favor of others and don't play in favor of others. And I think that's why you're seeing those big shifts. But, they're still top 10 players.
Oh, yeah.
They're still going to be up there, but it's just crazy to see how dominant people can get for a certain amount of times.
You know, something talking about people coming in from the outside who don't necessarily play cornhole, who just happen to see it like on ESPN or CBS or something. I feel like in so many ways, the regular viewer hopping on there doesn't understand the gravity of what it takes to get to that TV spot.
Oh yeah.
It's
Because,
insane.
Like there is a giant bracket that you have to work your way through just to get to that spot.
Oh yeah.
Like you beat that bracket out, then you got to go play this other bracket, and that one's on TV. But even still, that's not going to guarantee you that first place, you know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we saw it this weekend. 2 guys threw an 11 in the King Seat game and lost.
Yeah.
Didn't make it to the TV. And they threw an 11.
Yeah. And that's what Kendall and I were actually talking about this morning, where it's being pros. A lot of it is just the consistency of being able to do that, which I guess this, you know, in a roundabout way proves to me that PPR is important. I don't know. But it's the consistency of it. Because, like, there are plenty of times where I've had a night where I'm just lights out, throwing the best games of my life, where, like, technically speaking, I could probably score a couple points on some of the pros. It's like, but my next game after that, no shot. Or, like, for the next 3 weeks after that, I'm throwing, like, a 5-5. And so, but it's those people who are throwing pretty good. Like, it's really impressive on ESPN. They've been doing that since 8 a.m. that morning.
Yeah.
Like, you're seeing that, and it's being recorded at like 7 or 8 p.m. For 12 hours straight. They have been throwing that same level of perfection.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And, like, that's what it's really all about.
Yeah, you get those guys that are, I mean, just day in, day out. They have a good game. They're going to throw an 11. They have a bad game. If they have an absolutely terrible game, they're still going to throw an 8 or a 9.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible game. And most of the time at that point, it's because the board's dirty and the other person's also throwing an 8 or a 9. I mean, it's just so consistent.
Yeah.
Let's hop back on thinking about some of this whole scoring and stat stuff. So one of the big changes that's happened recently, and this is less of like the professional end of it. This is more of the like common everyday tournaments and, you know, competitive players or whatever, where Scoreholio introduced the player scoring, which
Amazing.
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, we use it at Bag and Bash.
Yeah, I think that it's another era of just smart thinking. Like, everybody's got their phones, so let's have them keep up with the score on their phones.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a hot take here. I think it's great, but I do think it is for I don't know, like just for a lower tier tournament. I think it like when you get to like maybe not the ACL, but if it's something just absolutely huge, a lot of money on the line, I think right now it's perfect. I think because once again, everybody has their phones, keep up with it, and that's kind of where the culture of cornhole is at. But I don't think for me, outside of like just smaller events, I think in the years to come, like I feel like it's leaning into more of the professionalism. I do think tablets have a bit of professionalism attached to it, for
100%.
sure. But obviously buying tablets, having them all charged, having everything, keeping up with them is a huge task.
Yeah.
And so using your phones is the obvious solution to that. But I think as it moves forward, I think we'll have a bell curve that kind of goes back to the tablets.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a scale there. You know, we're in the Hideaway. We've got 6 lanes. You know, price for 6 tablets is here.
Oh, yeah.
Not too bad. We can make do with tablets. Then you can get up to 30 boards, price for tablets here. At that point, let's go to player scoring. But then you get up to ACL, and it's like, this is a professional event. Do we want to do this, or do we want to buy 120 tablets? They also have the money for the 120 tablets, so you can go back to it.
Yeah, just because of, like, you know, what happens in a professional event when somebody's phone dies. There's so many variables. It's like they have the tablets, they've got backups on hand. It's like it makes the most sense in that environment to just have the provided infrastructure for keeping the score.
Oh yeah, but the situations where it is shining, it is amazing. Like Bag and Bash, it was it was
great.
Oh yeah, for something like that, absolutely perfect.
I mean, it saved us from buying 30. We would have bought 32 tablets.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, not just 32 tablets, but also keep in mind this is like a 16-hour event almost, or 13 hours
across 3 days.
Yeah, and
where are we getting those charged at?
Exactly. Yeah, having to charge those, and so at that point, the charging banks you're using for the tablets, use them for your phones.
Yeah,
Same
exactly.
thing. Yeah.
Yep. So what do you guys speculate the next things are going to be with scorekeeping and with stats?
I mean, kind of going back to what we were saying with like the professionalism, I don't see how this would ever happen because of the nature of cornhole. Because obviously, if you have a huge tournament, the amount of games that get played in just at a national, like the amount of rounds, the amount of games, it's just insane. But like on ESPN, obviously, you have the convenience of it's the one place where players can just play. They're not having to go back and plug in scores. Like there's somebody doing it for them.
Oh yeah.
It's the same thing with like, with basketball, they're not running over to a chalkboard after they score and, wiping it off, putting the new number down. It's like it's kept up. I don't know how we'll ever get to that point for rounders and, the prelims getting to the big events. I would like to see on broadcast lanes where no longer players are having to plug in their scores.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be one of the first big steps is at least on broadcast lanes of it being kind of kept up by somebody. But outside of that, I don't really know where else we can go.
Let's pause for a second.
Okay.
Major League Cornhole. Right.
Oh my.
Look, I know. One thing that I did
this conversation will last longer than the league.
maybe look. God. Rest in peace. One thing that I really did like about.
I'm sorry.
All right, I'm back.
One thing I really did like about Major League Cornhole is having some sort of official.
Yes.
That's there.
Yeah.
Whether that person keeps score or not, like there is some sort of official that is keeping the rules. Like if there are rules, keep them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe have that person manage the score.
Yeah.
It's like,
I think the ACL, I've heard rumors here and there about that's their plans.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also looking at it this way, compared to other professional sports, getting a little controversy here. Cornhole does not pay well. And you put an official on every board, it's going to pay even worse.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing.
I guess I'm more aiming towards like the main broadcasts.
Well, yeah.
I
think
that's
main
where I'm at
broadcast would
is
be
just
a start,
the main
yeah.
broadcast lanes. Because like when you go to a national, you have generally 4 courts that are the broadcast lanes. And I think because like obviously like on the ESPN broadcast lane, that's all completely automated. It's as if it's a full blown professional sport, which it is. But I feel like when you get to the national, the broadcast lanes are just they're a normal lane with some curtains around them. And so I think that's where it would be nice to have an official because I mean, on ESPN, they kind of have officials too. Like they're, off the screen, but they'll let them know like with timeouts, how long you have, watch the clock, stuff like that. And I'd like to see that on broadcast, like smaller broadcast lanes as well.
It just get your bag checks over with at the beginning and all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah. I think that would need to be a good improvement. Maybe not necessarily with the score keeping itself, but just with the game keeping.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One thing I would really like to see, which it would be a lot of work to implement, not only from a developer standpoint, but from the player standpoint, is percentages for airmails and rollbags. How it would get done to be accurate, I don't know, but golly, I would love it.
God, like having the ability.
It's the same thing as a free throw percentage. It just would require some person to just watch and write it all down.
I'm shooting a free throw. Did I make it? With a roll shot, you throw a roll shot and it just bunches up in front. You say, "Oh no, I wasn't trying to roll."
Like the difficult thing that apart like with cornhole compared to other sports is that it's like the cornhole event. There are so many games happening at any given moment, whereas the Broncos are playing. Well, that's one game. You know, and so you can dedicate a lot of focused energy to that one game.
That is true.
And so it's like keeping up with those kinds of stats, which I think that the leagues and the softwares have done a good job coming up with stats to keep up with. I think that's awesome to be able to do that through a tablet. However, stuff like airmails and whatnot, like you would have to depend on the players to sit there and plug that in. And, a lot of people, there's probably going to be some people who are like, you know what? I hit 4 airmails.
Yeah,
exactly.
Every time.
And that's the thing. Like that's one of those that'd be super cool to see. Realistic? No. But golly, it'd be so cool to be able to see all those stats.
Wasn't that a weird thing that happened were a couple times where people, like, when they would wash, if they had like a 6-6 wash, they would just put in a 12-12 wash for their stats to get boosted.
Yeah.
I know that was a thing for a while, wasn't it? I'm assuming it's still a thing. I don't know how you'd get around that.
I mean, you can go back and review all the games now, and people are more adamant about stats now, so it's harder to get around that.
That's true. I guess, yeah, you do have the beginnings of nerds looking at everybody's stats.
Yeah, and the way that came to light was somebody else got in trouble.
Yeah.
For padding stats when it wasn't him, it was actually his opponent. And so now you've got the people you're playing with after said guy got, kicked out. People are now looking like, oh, I don't want that to happen to me. So
yeah.
I'm making sure I'm keeping up with this. So it hasn't been an issue anymore, I do not believe.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of hopeful and interesting developments I would like to see with like scoring features and whatnot. Like one of the things I would love to see that could become a reality, I don't know, is having a server infrastructure to be able to stream and watch every single court.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So basically having built-in webcams on all the towers and stuff.
Yep.
And like you see a game on the bracket, you click on it, and it opens up the video.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, even if it's the typical, scoremate view of you're on one side and you can see one board really well, you can kind of see the other one. Even that would be a start.
Oh,
that'd look great.
I'm telling you, ACL, that's a cash cow right there.
It is.
It costs a lot of money to get it going, but
I would pay $20 a month to be able to do that every month.
Oh, I would too.
100%.
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
Yeah. I mean, like I'm so invested in the game and I love it so much. It's like I would definitely pay to be able to watch guys play without scrambling, at the last second to watch it on ESPN or CBS, which, gosh, like 50% of the people involved in Cornhole, they don't even have those services. So they can't even watch that.
Well, and because one of the problems too is, I guess also because we're kind of still at the early stages of Cornhole with like certain pros and the way they organize, like especially events like nationals, like the broadcast lane, I guess I'm not fully certain, but I'm pretty sure they can kind of finesse who's on the broadcast lane, like what games they want to watch. So if they're big name players, obviously they want that on the live stream. But there are times where, I'm on the broadcast lane, but then on lane 74 in the back corner, you've got, Mark Richards and Jay Rubin in a singles match. And it's just like, oh, I mean, I'm glad I'm watching this game on the broadcast, but it's like I can hear you guys mentioning the fact that you can see something behind you. It's like, I'd like to see it too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, once you can get to that point where you can watch every game, because there's so much going on.
Even if it's not like super high production or anything, just being able to watch it and having the scoreboard front and center on
just
the stream.
One big camera looking over all of it at once.
I mean, hey, like, look,
zoom in on the board you want. You got it.
It'd be cool.
Yeah. Definitely.
There was one time we were Nico was making a really hot run, and so me and you were trying to keep up with Nico, and I walked in your office, and all three of your screens was, there's a bracket here, there's Nico's Facebook here, there's a live stream here, and you're like, which one is this on? Like just looking around trying to find it.
Oh my God, a hacker man over there.
Yeah, literally.
I mean, that's basically what it is these days, is trying to find if they're streaming it on Facebook or like, it's like, man, I just wish there was a central, easy way.
That'd be so nice.
Yeah.
Well, with no further ado, thanks for tuning in, watching, or listening. Be sure to like this video, subscribe on YouTube to keep up with our new episodes, and you can listen to this on Spotify as well. But we will see you next time. And use that discount.
Geartalk.
Use the discount code Geartalk for 5% off. All right, see you next time.